No mic?
Maybe I'll just have to shout.
Do you want here? Take one of these, Ginny. And see, come and join in.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Charleston Festival, if you haven't been here already. And it's a very special pleasure for me to welcome two authors back to the platform today who, like Charleston itself, have very much to offer beyond the printed page. Anyone who's visited Charleston knows that the experience is about colour and design, about food and gardens, and about how we live our lives. In all these respects and more, today's speakers are entirely attuned to everything Charleston stands for. Emma Bridgewater's name is synonymous with her pottery, all manufactured in Stoke-on-Trent, where my father, Quentin Bell, Vanessa Bell's son, himself trained as a potter back in the 1930s. Many of those pots are today part of Charleston's exuberant collection of ceramics. Emma's own pottery has become a byword for colour and bold patterning. But over the years, her spots, stripes and flowers have migrated from vases and coffee cups onto stationery, hats, cushions and umbrellas. One feels Vanessa Bell would have responded to such a multifarious approach to decoration. Emma's now taken the plunge and crossed the line into writing, and today she's here to talk about the resulting book, her memoir, Toast and Marmalade. Sarah Raven is a wonderful gardener, but she's also a naturalist, a journalist, a florist and designer, and a television presenter who, like Emma, has turned her wonderful taste into an incredibly successful business, selling everything from zinnias to the vases to put them in. Not content with this, Sarah is also one of the best cookery writers around. You've got to try her crab cakes with chili jam. But now Sarah has turned her energies to a book, which is really a homage to her husband's grandmother, Vita Sackville West. Vita, as we all know, was a powerful presence in Bloomsbury, a formidable and unconventional woman whose creation of the garden at Sissinghurst has guaranteed her immortality. Sarah's book, Vita Sackville West's Sissinghurst, explores the woman herself and the evolution of her garden with an insider's eye. And here, to weave this wealth of life and art, gardens and interiors into an even more glorious tapestry with her customary skill, is a cherished friend of Charleston, the writer, critic and journalist Nicolette Jones. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma Bridgewater, Sarah Raven and Nicolette Jones.
Thank you, Virginia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to this superlative tent. Emma Bridgewater, in her gorgeous book, Toast and Marmalade, opens one of her chapters thus. Tents smell lovely, don't they? Slightly musty, a whiff of grass, something they finish the canvas with, socks, holidays. This snippet gives you an indication of why Emma's book, like Sarah Raven's, fits so well with Charleston, a place that wraps you in overwhelming sensuous delights, and, as Virginia has said, is a demonstration of how to make the domestic beautiful. Both Sarah's and Emma's books are rapturous celebrations of the smells, sights, and tastes of a blissful domesticity. Vita Sackville West was passionate, as we've heard, about colour and texture, and Emma's new book, an interweaving of Vita's columns chronicling the making of her garden at Sissinghurst, with commentary upon them, cites typically this description of Vita's favourite old-fashioned roses. Rich as a fig broken open, soft as a ripened peach, flecked as an apricot, coral as a pomegranate, bloomy as a bunch of grapes. Sarah, in a similar vein, writes of waking at Sissinghurst with the light coming through Vita's amber flasks on the window ledges, and the scent on a spring morning of the huge osmanthus trained on the wall below the windows, which, as it fades, is replaced by the spicy fragrance of wisteria and the sweet smell of the rose blossom time. Take these two books home with you from Charleston, and you will take with you two goodie bags of sensory pleasures. Sarah Raven, we've heard, trained as a doctor, but married Vita's grandson, Adam Nicholson, lived for a while herself at Sissinghurst, and is now all sorts of things, including gardener, cook, journalist, teacher, and television presenter. Her recent episode you might have seen of the Great British Garden Revival considered our passion for perfect lawns, another feature of Sissinghurst, and advocated flowering lawns in a way that instantly made you want to rush out and plant one. Like Vita's, Sarah's is an aesthetic of abundance and colour. Emma Bridgewater's Pottery and her name, which it carries, stand for home and welcome. And her memoir recounts the inspirations, convivial breakfasts, summer picnics, domestic joys in a family with 8 siblings, behind her colourful, relaxed, fun, easy-to-use china for a non-matching sort of life. Founded in 1985, Emma's business now has a turnover of £21 million.
I do wish it did.
Oh, no? Oh, do tell me how much. No, rather less.
I think I know.
All right.
No, more like 14.
More like 14.
Yeah.
Wikipedia. You can't trust it.
No, because that's so good. I love misinformation, don't you? Yes. I fibbed every time someone's cheeky enough to ask my age. I give the answer I think I'll get away with. I think a miasma of uncertainty is good.
Yes.
Wherever numbers are concerned.
Emma, as I was saying, is 27. And her business has a turnover of 45 million.
Correct.
Good. I'm glad we've got that straight. I'm going to ask you first to talk a little bit about how the books came about and why you decided to turn to writing. Emma, perhaps your book reads rather like a tribute to your mother. It's about...
It couldn't really not be. She is so much at the heart of my work. Am I close enough to that? Yes. Yeah?
Pull it a bit closer. Yeah, okay.
I just didn't want to sit with my back to you over there, sorry.
They're on screen,
my mum was... She'd be astonished by how hard I've worked, and my sister Nell particularly, but also Clover and Tom, that because she spent quite a lot of her life lying on the sofa, yawning quite a bit, and suggesting that someone else make the lunch. But she was nevertheless one of those just very, very inspiring women who could make a house that everybody wanted to be in, that had what exactly like Sarah's house does, a great sense of welcome, and everything's easy, and it doesn't matter how many you are for lunch, dinner, whatever, and why don't we all rush down to the river because it's a really hot day and tear all our clothes off and jump in.
And this idyllic moment, of course, we should tell the story of what became of your mother and why, in some ways, it's a lost idyll for you.
Yes, and my poor mum had an appalling hunting accident 22 years ago, a bit more than 22 years now, and she lived on a strange sort of half-life, a ghost of herself, and that was a very, very big, bad strain for us, her children, and for all her friends and wider family. I think we had a sort of crash course in a situation, and then a rather extended version of what a lot of people know.
Sorry, Emma, just get a bit closer. Is it all right that we need to be a bit closer to the mic? Yes, a few nods at the back, sorry.
It was as if, when she came round from the coma, she'd got Alzheimer's very, very badly, and stayed like that for a long time and sort of aged a bit. It took a very, very, very long time to let go. But in fact, this time last year, or March last year, I knew that the doctor said she won't let us do any tests and she won't take any medicine. So although she was entirely speechless and helpless, she was still asserting her will in quite a characteristic way. But we think she really is now probably on the way out. She defied their timing, but it made it sort of possible for me to think, because I had got to the point of thinking she was going to outlive me, and my whole life was going to be led, whole adult life was going to be led in the shadow of this very, very sad situation. But so knowing she was going to die was very liberating, and in fact she died just before Christmas, and so spending some time last summer thinking about her was just the greatest privilege, and lots of memories came back that I hadn't accessed for ages, and that it felt like just a huge privilege. And as I guess quite often happens, the day of her funeral, all the bad stuff rushed away, and all the good stuff came rushing back, and it was there she was, and it was all okay again. But she has definitely, I think she would have done anyway, inspired the business. It was 5 years in when she had her accident. But I think it has what my brother-in-law calls put a stone in my shoe that's meant I have kind of been struggling. I think I probably worked harder than I would have done otherwise. But so it was a sort of rounding off, being able to write about her last year.
Yes. Of course, you're also writing under the shadow, as it were, or in tribute to a great woman, Sarah, in writing your book. Describe to us a bit about what was so new and special in her aesthetic and her approach to gardening. What's so inspiring to you?
I think the thing that catalysed my interest, I mean, was various things, but mainly, to be honest, Vita's domestic eye. I mean, her interiors. I have to say, Vita was not domestic. She, rather like me, I mean, I'm pretty messy. She was pretty untidy, I think. And she certainly never cooked a meal in her life, which could not be true, could be said of me. But she was not a domestic person, but she had a really fantastic way of putting together interiors, which, of course, if you're a good interior creator, you're going to be a good exterior creator. So she definitely started with interiors and moved outside. But there are sort of threads that go through, which I find very moving. And she uses a phrase in her garden writing, cram, cram, every chink and cranny. And the thing about that is that also was true inside. So if you look at one of her rooms, there would be a beautiful Persian carpet on a table as well as on the floor. There would be beautiful tapestries on the walls. There would be amazing things found in Mexico in great ceramic bowls, found in Morocco or Tunisia, wherever. And so there were these themes of absolutely cram-packed full, some very distinguished, rather valuable things, but mixed up and jumbled with things that she'd found very cheaply in a market. And rather similarly, outside, it's exactly the same, that all the walls don't have tapestries, they have roses. Every single inch of wall, every path in her day, no longer sadly, is encroached by plants. And, not just planting over walls, but in walls. So she'd shove things like erysimum, Bowles mauve, into the moat wall, so that it was just totally encrusted, both inside and outside. And for me, that's so exciting in a reaction to the kind of minimalist age that in some ways I was growing up in, and in the 90s, and living in London where everything was...
dreary days.
And I love all that. And that's, I mean, I lived at Sissinghurst for 8.5 years or something like that. And I think that's the thing that I took away with me more than anything, is her inspiration. She was a brilliant, genius interior designer.
And you said that one of the motives for writing the book was to capture the garden at the most perfect moment. And that most perfect moment was the point when the exuberance was just sort of tipping over into chaos.
Yeah.
So it's...
And that's the thing, is it's very easy to think that if you're a certain mindset, that exuberance equals untidiness. Mm-hmm. And I think that is deeply wrong. I think exuberance equals excitement and romanticism and full-on vigorous life. And it's even much harder to create exuberance tipping into chaos than it is to create tidiness. And it's got to be just the right side, but literally on the brink. Christopher Lloyd said a very good thing once, which is the garden looks best a year after the person has died. And that is true, and it's where things go, a little bit. But they're not completely, roses will still bloom because they have been pruned relatively recently, all that kind of stuff. It's just, I think gardens can get over-manicured as horticulture becomes more and more professionalised. And the amateur gardener is the greatest gardener.
Does that give us an excuse not to garden for a year, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, particularly if you have Vita's whole thing was to have quite low maintenance planting, so she had lots of flowering shrubs, flowering trees, and very low maintenance perennials, things that didn't need staking. The only staking thing she ever had was delphiniums. And so it was actually lots of roses, of course, and when there was sulphur in the air, you didn't have to spray your roses against funguses because sulphur is the fungicide. So when there was greater pollution, roses were very low maintenance.
Interesting. It's interesting that both of you are taking as your models women who seem to be in the domestic arena, the house and the garden, but in fact, from your account, were not in fact very domestic. They're not your mother, as you say, lay around and hope somebody else would would make lunch.
Great delegator.
But you've made these women into, as it were, brands, and you've made yourselves to some degree, and the inheritance of your mothers and your grandmothers even into a kind of brand. Tell us about how that feels, and how do your daughters, say, respond to the heritage of that? Are they going to carry the brand on?
It's a really curious feeling, this, knowing that you're taking a lot of very sort of heartfelt, essentially private convictions and turning them into stuff for people to buy. And it did bother me. And then suddenly it didn't, when I realised what a very, very wonderful thing is going on, in that it's strangely impersonal. Just before Facebook sort of took off, we did some focus groups. And what I could see, listening in on the conversations that lots of nice cooperative ladies came and had about, you know, what they like to put in their kitchens and whether they bought Emma Bridgewater and what they cooked for lunch, was that they were using me as a sort of, I was kind of a silhouette. It wasn't really about me at all. It was about them. And there was a very exciting, it just felt like a privilege that I was participating in their lives in a very sort of useful way. They really appreciated this new material for their lives, but it wasn't about me. And I felt that my grannies would be completely at home with it somehow. It was just making lovely things more available. But people were making their own story out of them.
I think the thing that is slightly more complicated about my story is that, of course, Vita is not my brand, it's the National Trust brand. Yes. So my brand is actually consciously has to be very different. Yes. Because I don't want to be seen to be benefiting from my relationship with Sissinghurst. So I literally didn't mention Sissinghurst in my gardening life for the first 20 years really of work, and then because of this I've had to a bit more. So I actually kept the two very separate. But so I would say the brand I have, separate to Sissinghurst, is very much based on my mother's aesthetic. But if she was here, which she isn't, she would laugh very loudly at that, because she is exceptionally undomestic, and I would always like food to look nice and be presented not in kind of really formal way, but in beautiful bowls, rather Charleston-esque bowls, but they happen to probably come from Afghanistan or somewhere. And my mother would always say, "Why on earth are you bothering with that?" You know, because with her it would be slap, 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 3 pans, spoon, spoon, spoon. That was lunch or dinner. And she really feels that my whole kind of addiction to the edible flower is the most absurd thing that one could possibly imagine. But on the other hand, her flower aesthetic and her garden aesthetic and my father's was exceptional, but she would not recognise it because she's too sort of old-fashioned to think of it as having a good eye, really.
Mm. Yes, it was just life, wasn't it?
It was just life, yeah, instinct, yeah.
It's interesting because both of you seem to have created what, in the lovely photographs taken by Andrew Montgomery in this book and in previous books of yours and in your marketing material, looks like an idyll, looks like a kind of almost unattainable perfection, which could put a kind of pressure on us. We love it, we aspire to it, we want to be part of it. But actually, I think, Emma, you've said you can make yourself extremely miserable by trying to do everything perfectly. No one's perfect, but women get forced into thinking they have to be. So we can sort of vicariously enjoy the idea that our lives might be like yours, but not have to try too hard to...
Oh, I hope I make it...
Emma's just as untidy as
Yeah,
I am,
I'm
just to record that. And her husband's even worse.
He's the worst washer-up in the world. And none of us have ever ironed anything. And I'm always quite careful. I think the photographs in the book do show that it's pretty relaxed.
Yes,
I've always made a point of not wanting it to look like domestic perfection, because I do think that's a sort of act of bullying.
Yeah.
And, you know, the idea of starched sheets, it's never going to happen, though. But I think it's quite important to fess up and say that if you want to do marvellous, creative, huge-scale feasts such as Sarah and my husband Matthew are addicted to, you are going to have a very messy life, and not pretend it's all perfection, because that's remotely possible.
In many ways, it's like the aesthetic of Charleston, which is actually quite makeshift in some ways, but creative. And that you can imagine mess in those rooms.
Yeah, you
It
drag
would
the
have been fine.
furniture out of the house and you drag it around the garden.
Yes.
And
then
I would
back
say
in
that
again when it
the
rains.
key thing is no one meal would ever look the same. And I would say that's probably something that we would have in common, is that, there isn't a matching set of china with a matching set of glasses, and it's not like that. It's much more shambolic. And so literally I would say in my house, and I would say in Emma's house, Emma's an old friend of mine, so I know, that no meal would ever look in any way similar to the previous meal. Because it's just that the table might be the same, but what's on it will be very different.
Yes, it's in your photographs and in your account in the memoir, they're very informal occasions that you're talking about, where people are coming and going and improvising breakfast and picnics and so on, and it's all happening a bit sort of off the cuff, and that informality is something you try to carry into the business, presumably.
As much as possible, but not too far.
Well, I was going to say
Accountant
that
would have a fit if she heard you say that.
at another level, of course, what you have to be is extremely organised, and you're running very successful businesses, both of you. So how do you reconcile the informality of your ideal life and the way you actually like to operate with the demands that are made on you by the work that you have to do in order to make these businesses
With
work?
enormous, very uncomfortable compromise at every step of the way, and a constant searching for the right people in the team, in the business, and just when you think you've got it right, the key person leaves to have a baby or whatever. So it's a constant search, really, and by this time I know that it's never going to feel just right. But it's about the people one employs to work as a team together.
And do you feel that your work-life balance is right?
Good heavens, no. I got up at 3 a.m. and flew into Luton from Romania. That's quite a typical kind of day. No, I mean, I don't know that. I don't think a work-life balance is possible. I think we've carved out a very, very extraordinary workload for ourselves as women in the last. I think Sarah and I have rather similarly appallingly stressful lives with far too much in the diary, and certainly my 2 older daughters have spent some time, devoted quite a lot of time to working out if there's an easier way. I think they look at me and think, you're mad. It looks absolutely exhausting. But now one of them's training at circus school and they're putting on night circus shows, so I can see it might not be, they'll get the work bug.
One thing we should point out is that one of Emma's sisters is Nell Gifford of Gifford's Circus, who's a ringmaster. And I think that's very interesting too in the light of Charleston, because the circus motif, which has found its way into things of yours, is also a Charleston motif that we see harlequins on the walls. Quentin liked it. Quentin had circus figures.
Well, it's the ultimate romance. I mean,
yes.
My sister's life is beyond hard. Tonight's the first night. A quick plug for Gifford Circus. Touring the Cotswolds from now, at Sudeley Castle tonight. But lots of new venues, and they'll be in the Oxford Parks and in Bath and all sorts of unlikely places. But the beauty of their life and the energy, the extreme hard work that goes into creating that is constantly completely fascinating. But the circus is a sort of motif of beauty and glamour and
It really is.
something gypsy and fugitive and exciting.
I think it's very interesting that both of you have, underneath, you have a huge amount of hard work, and on the surface you have romance and glamour and exuberance.
I'm glad that bit's working, that it looks like that.
I was rung up by the Office of National Statistics about 2 weeks ago. I'm sure some of you are in their survey. You get these random calls. I bet some of you have had the call. And this woman said to me, she'd rung about 5 times in the previous week, and I kept saying, no, I'm sorry, I'm far too busy, I'm sorry, I'm far too busy. Anyway, eventually I was cooking supper, and I said, yes, okay, I'll give you half an hour. And she said, no, I need an hour and a half. I said, I will give you half an hour. And so she then said, one of the questions, so, Miss Raven, how many hours did you do last week between the 26th of March and the whatever? And I said, oh, hold on a minute, I'll just add it up. And I added up my fingers, and I said, I think about 75 or 80. And she said, no. How many hours did you do between the 26th of March and the 5th of April? I said, yeah, I'm saying that. She said, well, you can't possibly have got that right. She then went
She
to this
can't
great...
possibly have talked to another entrepreneur.
Anyway, and I reckon I was underestimating.
Yeah, of course
But
you
I mean,
were.
but my work isn't boring sitting at a computer, kind of. It's really, half of that might be having a meeting in the garden, or, you know, like Lemma, half of that is lovely, more than half, most of it is lovely stuff, but you do very long hours. And you can only do it if you're mad. I mean, you know, I am officially a massive workaholic. And I think it's interesting, it's never occurred to me that, I wonder if there's something, my father died when I was just 17, and Emma's mother died when she was young, and they were
The
both...
accident.
Yeah, it's not
The-
really good.
Oh, sorry, not,
Yeah.
didn't die.
It was as if
she died.
but worse.
And they were both, obviously, so I know Emma well enough to say that her mother was the inspiring parent in her family, and sorry, my poor mother, but my father was very inspiring to me particularly, and I wonder if that turns you into a bit of a mad workaholic. I don't know. Yes. It's never occurred to me before, but when she was talking about it, I just
But
thought...
is your mum a very busy person? Because it interests me that Nell and I have knitted, I mean, Chloe was just the same, these very, very industrious careers. I mean, hardworking does only just begin to describe it.
Nell and Clover being two of your sisters.
Whereas she was fundamental. I mean, she would often get up at 5. A beautiful morning this time of year, she'd be up early, gardening, making bread. She'd possibly have exercised 2 or 3 horses.
Yeah.
But a lot of other mornings, she wouldn't get up. I mean,
No.
she didn't, and she'd fall asleep during dinner and snore loudly.
No, leave the baking and the horse caring out of my mother's life. So I eat quite a lot of sofa inhabitation, I would say. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think that might be the difference. I think for some reason our generation took on this sort of idea that we were going to do absolutely everything, and it does seem to me to be. I mean, it is hugely good fun, but it's not exactly sustainable. I definitely found whatever it was, about sort of 6 or 7 years ago. This has got to stop. This is absolutely ridiculous. And the brainwave was to make Matthew run the company for a bit. I hadn't, as the girls said afterwards, why didn't you do that ages ago?
Do you think women are more inclined to take everything upon themselves somehow? Are we?
Yeah, it hadn't crossed my mind to make him
Yes.
do it. And I was on my knees with exhaustion.
One of the things you talk about in the book is how you came about to find what it was you were going to do with your life. You didn't know that it was going to be pottery until
Certainly didn't.
a critical moment. How do you feel now, both of you, about what you ended up doing? Do you think it was luck, chance, character, destiny?
You go first, Sarah.
Yeah, Sarah.
Well, I was a medic in the Royal Sussex County in Brighton, and definitely for me it was. I really loved being a doctor. Actually, I really enjoyed it, and again, I think that might be that I looked after my father and the person who brought me up, who was my nanny before that. So I was sort of quite an addictive carer in a way. But for me, gardens, it just felt like totally like sort of bilingual thing. That it was very just instinctively in me, and so certainly gardening and cookery were I can't even remember what you asked me now.
The question is how you ended up. Was it chance? Does it feel like fate? Does
Fate.
it feel like...
Are you doing the right thing now?
And
Yes.
I
By your own
absolutely
rights.
love what I do. I
Yes, good.
absolutely love it. I mean, you know, it's
More than
been
you
Chelsea
think.
week, and so I'm slightly frazzled at the moment, but every day is different, and I totally love every single day of my life.
And do you feel that it was mapped out for you, or you were just lucky to have taken the right turnings, or to recognise what your thing was and get on with it?
I think I'm a real optimist, and I'm a workaholic, and I am quite creative, and so if I'm on holiday, which is a pretty rare event in that I tend to write books on holiday, but I suddenly, you know, I have a notebook, and it's just like, oh yes, that's such a good idea, and I just get so excited, and then the whole ball gets rolling,
She's up
and then
early morning on holidays,
So-
5 o'clock.
so yeah,
Tap.
it's who I am, is what my business is. It's completely
And what, in fact, you do, as we were just discussing earlier, is you give an awful lot of information in your books. There's, you know, it's not a lot of flannel. You get your money's
There's
worth.
no flannel.
Yes.
Sarah is the most astonishingly
Yes, none.
generous giver of information, and it's not just sort of airy-fairy, it's hard scientific information. I've watched you giving lectures and read all of your books, and I think you deliver so much more in the way of real hard teaching than anybody else I know.
Thank you. Well, the thing is that I'm greedy in all ways. So I'm greedy for information. I'm greedy for food. I drink a bit too much. You know, I just do everything a bit too much, including learning. You know, everything. I travel too much. I do everything too much.
But so you'd say that your career, it really is a reflection of who you were going to be, and you don't miss the medicine.
No, I don't. I mean, I did a bit. To be honest, partly sitting next to somebody, what do you do? I'm a doctor.
Oh.
But you get over that.
We know what happens next.
It's all right. You can say I used to be a doctor and then I moved forward.
You can. Not 22 years later. I think it's a bit slightly. But interestingly, my checkbook still says Dr. Raven. I haven't quite managed to change that.
So
Matthew definitely thinks that you're the person to ring for
Yeah,
medical
he does.
advice.
He rings me in the middle of the night. Oh, we've got a crisis.
But you feel slightly differently, don't you? That it wasn't the
Well, it was the last thing I would have expected, and I think one of the reasons people find 40 a bit sad, and obviously that was very recently that I was 40, is because I think it's around then that you have to admit to yourself that all those other careers that you were going to have any minute now, you've got to say goodbye to. And I think I'm someone who carried a whole lot of ideas of what I might be long after I'd started the business. And one of the things that was definitely sort of gnawing away at me was the world of books. I think I was just too flaky after university to go for a job interview with a literary agent. And I did see one, and she said, "Oh, do try and write a book. That would be so much more fun. And if it doesn't get published, well, that's good. That'll make you much better at being a literary agent," which somehow sort of it was marvellous advice, but I didn't take it. I just went and got a job the next week. And I think in a way, I'd always been longing to write something. So for me, now it feels as if my life is a bit more complete. I have really, really loved my business, and I feel very proud of it. But I don't necessarily think that it was my destiny. And I think it would have changed and mutated quite a bit if not for the extraordinary thing of going to Stoke-on-Trent to find to find someone to make up some ideas for me, to make them real, and discovering an industry absolutely on the brink of extinction, and feeling utterly unexpected, very, very impassioned connection with a place that I couldn't bear to see die. And I feel every day very strongly that whatever other doubts I've had about what I do, the Stoke thing is very, very clear and strong for me. And we employ about 240 people currently in Stoke, and I just wish it was 2,400. I can't bear the chaos that we've left there. So oddly, that very unexpected thing became a driving force for me. But I was always sort of thinking, and I might be living in San Francisco soon. Or
There's a brilliant bit in Emma's book about that, about her going with her first sort of ideas of her prototypes of her bowl, a bowl and a mug, and it's really moving. It's fantastic.
And one of the things you were saying that it was almost a dying industry. But do you think now that we're not encouraging British manufacturing and design? I mean, you were lucky that your mother needed a birthday present at the critical moment and you couldn't quite find what you wanted.
A pair of cups and saucers seemed to be the only thing that would do. And once I'd realised that the factories weren't making the ones I was after, the only solution was to start the business myself. Strictly logical.
But what about encouraging other things that we should be doing or could be doing to encourage?
Well, I don't really understand. It feels like I've been making a big noise about how exciting and how interesting it's been to make things in the UK, and I don't understand why lots of young people aren't galloping around the Midlands looking for similar opportunities. There seems to be a sort of instinct that you've got to go abroad if you want to get something made, which I entirely refute. The story of do we make what's our sort of feelings about our manufacturing industries is quite big and complex in that we are still an enormous manufacturing force, but we don't really put made in Britain anymore, which could be to do with those buy British disasters of the 80s and the cars that broke down on the M1 and the washing machines that failed and the fridges that dribbled hopelessly. But somehow we're not proud enough of it.
I think there is I hope, and I think there is a change in that. I think that the sort of buying British public had a kind of reaction to all of that. So then everything had to be very cheap and Chinese. But then we all realise that the thing that we buy that's cheap and Chinese is broken in less than a year. And so if you'd actually bought something slightly more expensive and better made, and certainly as a buyer, I mean, I'm the main buyer for my business, I increasingly am attracted by the idea of buying in Britain and second in Europe rather than buying in India or China, or because it's just my experience that on the whole you get a better made product.
There you see, you heard it here. It's very, very important.
What you both produce is something that looks craft-like, looks individually designed, even when it is in fact mass-produced. You've managed to create an aesthetic that's...
It's not mass-produced. I mean, Emma's
it's a workshop. I
amazing.
love calling it a factory, but it is a series of workshops.
They're each hand done by, in moulds, but by a man who pours the slip. I mean, it's the most amazing. You must all go to her factory tour. It's the most incredible thing. If you are in that part of the world, I passionately recommend it. I hadn't been until a couple of years ago, and I had just a riveting time there, seeing how these pots are made. And you see it from the moment that the slip's poured in to the glazed.
It comes off the kiln.
And you're also buying crafted things for your business, in effect, and things that are made by small groups of people.
Yeah, I try to, and I mean, definitely more and more. I mean, the problem is always price, and what we find is we have to be clever in finding somebody who is kind of somewhere in the middle of that. But I mean, which Bridgewater is. I mean, that's what's so brilliant about it, is it's not very expensive for what you get. And more of that is a good thing. And certainly in terms of plants, obviously it's different, but putting them together in a certain way is rather like a new collection of ceramics. For us, it's a new collection of tulips. And certainly that is kind of handcrafted in that it's in my brain. But so in a sort of weird way, those two are related, I think.
I'm going to give the audience a chance in a moment to, so you can be thinking about your questions. I just want to ask you one more. Just to see if we're actually discussing the things you wanted to hear about. But I'm interested when you were talking about design, how much is it still your design, either of you? Is each individual 100%?
I mean, me and Matthew.
Yes, so you're not
we
delegating?
occasionally work.
100%.
100% you, right.
I mean, there's a design studio, and they're very marvellous, but the raw material is always provided by Matthew and I. We've occasionally, 2 or 3 times, worked with another designer. One of them has a Charleston connection, Mary McCarthy.
The hellebore.
No, that's Mary Fedden.
Yeah.
But that's literally those 2 people. Otherwise, it's Matthew and I.
And the inspirations are often, I mean, in the book you talk about everything from finding shards in the shoreline of the Thames and so on, looking at old pottery. How would you talk about where your inspirations come from?
I think it comes from deep inside, and people always say, the conversation came up again and again. This week in Transylvania, I was in India in February, and fighting off, people say, oh, are we going to see some Indian designs or some lovely Hungarian designs? No, absolutely not. Those inspiring, very, very lively, vigorous places make me want to dig deeper into my culture, the things we're talking about in terms of my grandmother's tastes, my mother's life, and how Matthew and I live, and what we really feel for. It's strange. You go and draw energy. The inspiration, I think, is deep inside oneself, but you need the energy of a new place sometimes. Does that make sense? When
Totally.
people say, where'd you get...
And I mean, it's similarly, a similar example with me is I've just been in Holland for 3 weeks, visiting a great number of tulip breeders and tulip growers. And one of the things that I've designed for autumn 2015 is a William Morris tulip wallpaper collection, which sounds sort of crazy, but so it's sort of seeing the things in Holland, but bringing them back, and they reminded me so much of various rooms in my parents' house as a child. So, Charleston tulip collection, how great would that be? That will be next, of course. So yeah, in the same kind of way, I think there's no point sort of copying, really. You have to rely on one's own creativity.
How interesting, how personal it is. Now, are there any other questions out there?
I heard some
If not, I shall ask
promising
them.
clearing of throats when you said it was question time.
Yes, people are thinking about it. There are 2 mics. Let's see, a brave person kicking it off, or I should go. Yes.
See your hand over
Oh,
there
yes.
as well.
That'll be Julia. You may have some connection with this place.
Actually, Emma, I just wanted to ask you something, because I know everything about Sarah. Sorry. I wondered, some people think that perhaps the ultimate accolade of arriving as a sort of great British advocate for achievement might come from somewhere in Buckingham Palace. But I wondered if, for you, it was becoming the subject of a Joanna Trollope novel.
That was so exciting.
Yes. Yes, explain the background to that remark.
And the Buckingham Palace, please.
Yes, indeed, both.
We'll pass over the Buckingham Palace bit. We'll focus on Joanna Trollope. She rang one day and said, could I come and have tea? I've got a favour to ask you and Matthew. Well, we fell over ourselves. Having met her in Oxford and knowing how nice she is, she's tremendously impressive, sort of slim and elegant person who's very much worked out exactly what she wants in life. And she said, I need a sort of really masculine environment, an industrial environment in which to set my next novel, which is about women, women possibly, well, it's about sort of the earning power of women and women in men's industries and women perhaps outstripping their husbands as far as work goes. Obviously, Matthew was slightly underwhelmed at that point, particularly when he read the book avidly. We got one from the publicist when it arrived. The potter's husband is an ageing rock star, which definitely isn't him. But anyway, what she wanted to do was be embedded in our business. And she spent a good 3 months. She does absolutely marvellously thorough research. She loved the factory and she spent more time there, and then, but also in our London office, to give kind of complete verisimilitude to the novel. So there's a sort of impressive backstory. So when I heard that it was about a woman a bit older than me who'd started a pottery, and she had 3 grown-up daughters, who were all possibly coming into the business, I thought, hooray, she's going to write my exit plan. Quick, finish the book. And was slightly disappointed that the story actually has nothing to do with me, or my daughters, I don't think, in that, well, her heroine won't let go. I'm longing to. If only my daughters would come battering at the door.
Did you recognise anything in her fantasy about this theme of women who are pioneers in a male world and possibly even eclipse maybe not their husbands but other people that they know around them, and the difficulties of that?
It's certainly. I mean, it is an odd thing. I didn't give it any thought going along, but looking back now, I can see that plunging into such a very unreconstructed environment as the potteries in Stoke-on-Trent, it was so unexpected that nobody realised that's what I was doing, and they would completely ignore me as I sort of went about my business in various people's factories. They would always assume that I was someone's designer or some photographer or something. That there was never any assumption that I was someone they need not talk in front of. Mm. But
was that an advantage?
Yeah,
Sometimes?
huge advantage.
Like being undercover.
It's marvellous. Yeah, you could do just. I found I could. Or perhaps it's a specialism. I know I am appallingly, relentlessly persuasive. If I've got an idea of what I want someone to do for me, I'll not give up. But anyway, that Joanna Trollope was. It was a very, very good moment, and she's become quite a good friend, so that was nice.
And Sarah, I'm going to ask you to spill the beans about the palace.
Oh, well, Emma, I always get the CBOBMB wrong. Which one is it?
I can't remember.
Anyway, she's got a gong, but I can't remember which one it is.
She's at least got an MBE. We can count on that.
It's the posh one. What's the posh one?
Well, it is.
All right. She doesn't have gone too shy.
It was very, very, very exciting. I didn't realise. I kind of like with anything in life. I never look forward to it. I never sort of think about it in advance. And one of my sisters dragged me off to Bicester 3 days before, and she said, "Em, you have to get a new frock. And where's the hat? And let's check out the shoes." I really hadn't thought about it at that point at all. And Matthew made sure that the other two, you take 3 people with you. And it was Elizabeth and Kitty, our 2 oldest daughters. And it was an astonishingly, amazingly happy-making thing. I suppose one of the things which Sarah probably knows inside out is that you never stop and say, "Whoa, look at that," ever. You're as an entrepreneur, you are perennially dissatisfied, and it's rather there's inside me there's always a feeling of things I haven't done and things I haven't done well enough.
And if only she was more obedient, she would be in the House of Lords, but she would never take any party's whip. So there's no chance of that.
None whatsoever. It wasn't on the cards. Anyway, enough of that.
Any more questions out there? If you don't have any, then I have some more, but there's a lady over there. Yep.
I should just stand up and shout.
Yes.
Thank you. It's for Emma. When you first went to Stoke with your ideas, I mean, it was obviously a positive response, but what was their initial response to you with your ideas?
The response in Stoke was, would I be able to pay my bill?
Oh, okay.
But interestingly, I was given credit quite quickly by a man who, it turned out, was quite good at going bust. I learned a lot about business very quickly. One of the things I still don't really know is what they think of me in Stoke. It's sort of impossible to think about. I know that they confessed when Matthew and I got married that they'd been desperately worried that when I first went there, age 23, I was clearly on the shelf. So they relaxed a bit once I got married and started having children. I think they think we're very eccentric and now part of the furniture. But in the basic sense, it didn't really matter what they felt what Sam felt. He was keen to help. He was wonderful, and he was interested that I could put some cash up front and then that I'd be able to pay the bills. But what really mattered was that the customers wanted it straight away. And when people ask me about starting a business, I always say, don't tell me about this anymore. Go and put it out on a stall in some craft market or on a website or however you may, and make sure there's a stampede for it. Because if there isn't, there's no point doing it. Yes. And that was the exciting thing, was the samples that I rejected. I was putting together a sample collection. Sam was making and soft firing the 4 shapes that I'd designed with a lot of help from him. And then I would take them clankety-clank back to London in my mini metro and experimented with the patterns and put together a collection. And the rejects I sold at the Jubilee Market because I desperately needed to raise the cash for his monthly invoices. And it was exciting. It was clearly the right thing at the right time. As with all successes, there's a massive element of luck. The timing was just completely right.
Yes. I'll just come to... Well, I was going to say, yes, I was going to ask both of them actually what your business advice might be for people.
Sort of saying about encouraging young people in this country to get into business, what advice would you give them? How do they start?
Should I let Sarah have a go at this? What do you think about it?
Well, in a very simplistic way, I teach how to grow cut flowers and how to grow vegetables as one of the things that I do. And so quite often I get young people or people who've perhaps been made redundant from their work or perhaps are thinking of retiring and wanting to set up a new business and based on growing flowers. And what I always say to them is you have to, just what Emma said, you've got to find your market before you grow a single flower. The thing that's so lovely and soft and squidgy and romantic and sweet is growing the flower. What is much harder is finding 10 B&Bs in your local vicinity within 3 miles so that you can deliver it easily, and 10 restaurants and 5 pubs. If you've got that, you've got a small business which starts you off. That's just talking about flowers, but cut flowers. But that's what I would say, is you've just got to suss that there's a market. Otherwise, you waste a lot of money and time in developing things. And obviously, that's hard to do. But I think Emma's right. You've just got to set your stall out. And if people like what you are trying to sell them in a tiny, small scale, then you've probably got a good business.
So the message is, if it starts small and doesn't work, give up.
No. If it starts small and isn't quite working, keep adjusting
Evolve,
it.
Yeah.
Right. Keep adjusting it. Evolve. Do pay attention to what the customers are saying and evolve your proposition. I mean, it won't work unless you're, well, as Sarah said, mad. I would say relentlessly determined. But if you do want to do it, it does work very well in terms of, to some extent, being able to regulate what you do, when you do it, and fitting that around children or, you know, whoever else you might be looking after.
Which in your case is 4 children, in fact.
Yeah.
Yes, and you've got...
I have 3 stepsons and 2 children of my own, so 5, but you know, not all the time.
Yes, fortunately, quite demanding. Yes, there was a lady in the corner. Yes, hello.
Yes, again for Emma, it's rather following on from the last one, but you are obviously the biggest show in town in Stoke. But has your success encouraged a lot of other smaller businesses to sort of, you know, come along in your slipstream, as it were?
In Stoke? Not as many as I'd like, really. But the thing about Stoke is that the groundswell is there, the grassroots are there. People will pot there, they really want to. I am really surprised that there isn't more copycat. There's been a bit. But I would say you could parallel this thing that we've been talking about of the things that you know about in life. How can you parley that into a business? And hunting around and looking for a metal worker or a jeweller, or, you know, there are lots of, this country is stuffed with very, very, very skilled craftspeople who don't necessarily who know what they want to make or how to sell it, that you might partner with as a marketeer, as a designer. But I keep saying, oh yes, Stoke is regenerating, and then really hoping that's going to be true. I wouldn't say the tide has fully turned, but I can't believe that we won't see sense at some point soon and stop shipping heavy ceramic stuff from the other side of the world in large quantities. I mean, there are signs, there are hints, and exactly what Sarah described, liking the idea of looking for British manufacturers. There are, I mean, the British buyers, you know, the store groups have found Stoke very difficult and impenetrable. They are sort of quietly coming back. But it's not the whoosh of new business that I would love to see. But the industry has got to a point now where it is sustainable, and I believe that, you know, the skills, in some strange way, the business, despite the big names having disappeared, or so many of them, and to some extent the workforce being at a rather perilously, sort of tipping towards middle-aged and later, it's quite possible for us to run a training programme, and there are people spontaneously going out into their garage and setting up little potting enterprises. So all I can say is fingers crossed for Stoke.
Sarah, this is again separating your business from Vita's story at Sissinghurst, but I'm interested in the question of whether, although Vita was very celebrated in her lifetime for her garden, do you think that she would have been able to imagine or foresee or predict the influence that her style of gardening has had on you, on other people? You know, something has moved forward.
Definitely not, I would
Yes.
say.
But do you? I think she might have known exactly.
Well, the thing that one must remember about her is that she wasn't very proud about her garden writing. What she wanted to be famous for was her writing.
Yes, yes.
And unfortunately, you know, she isn't so famous for her writing. I mean, lots of her books are still in print, and Virago, who published my book, published lots of her books. But she didn't get the recognition as a great poet or as a great writer that she dreamt of. And so, ironically, I think she wouldn't feel completely comfortable with the fact that the thing that she's remembered for is her garden writing and the garden that she created. I think, yes, Sissinghurst, but not her garden writing. It was almost like, it's a sort of genius violinist who's having to play in the pub, is how I think she would actually think about it.
Jobbing hack.
But don't
somehow.
you think she must have known, standing in the garden, that she'd made something utterly wonderful?
Yes, no, I think they definitely did recognise that, but I think, funnily enough, probably Harold more than Vita. And there
Just
were
a bit
wonderful
back from it.
letters from him saying, you know, you have created this wonderful thing. And he, the plaque at the bottom of the tower that he designed on her death, had designed on her death, had carved, says, you know, Vita Sackville VSW, who made this, who created this garden, with no recognition by him of his own role in it. And that's typical of him. But anyway, so I think he recognised it more than she did. But and also, I think one never imagines that a garden isn't a transient thing. I mean, it was one of Christopher Lloyd's great sort of troubles about Dixter, and I'm sure it would have been for her that she felt it had come and gone because the garden lived through the war, and it became, not in rack and ruin at all, but it became much more shambolic. And so I would imagine she wouldn't have expected the garden to still be there 80 years later.
And do you think it is still as good as it
Exactly
was?
the question.
Because that's the great question, isn't it?
Or is it different?
It's getting better. There's change afoot, and there's a new head gardener who is great and has read a lot of Vita. I always found it slightly shocking that people weren't required to read all her garden writing. It had got, when we lived there, it had got a little too tidy and professional, and a little soulless, and a little not enough from here, you know.
Exactly what you'd expect to happen.
Yeah.
Had rather
happened.
It sort of seemed inevitable.
Yeah.
But it's,
And because in a way there was no
exciting.
leader, there was no client. You know, I mean, there was no one. The public were the client, but then there was no one leading where it was to go. So it just went wherever the head gardener wanted it to go. And because I think it's as important a garden as maybe any at the moment. I think the National Trust have realised that it's very important to take it seriously, and so there's more leadership, and Vita is definitely on the ascent again in its influence.
It's interesting that tidy is the way it tends to go once a garden is public.
Yeah.
Obviously
Inevitably
something
with
you have to-
2,000 visitors a day sometimes.
Yeah.
You can't have everything kind of, you know, so it's a genuinely difficult debate. But I'd love to know what you all think, because one of the things that I feel, which is incredibly politically incorrect, I'm practically kind of have my head chopped off whenever I mention it, but I personally think that it would be better to shut off a few secondary paths, and you have primary paths that you walk through, so the secondary paths can be much more loose, and because they're not
So you
being
can look
trodden
down
on.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, in the museum world and in houses open to the public world, that is absolutely not what you're meant to have. And Simon Jenkins purposely said, I want people playing the piano rather than the piano being cordoned off with a red cord. I personally I feel very different to that now, because I feel it needs desperately to gain its spirit, and you can only do that if you don't actually tread through it if you are 2,000 people. But obviously that is very controversial.
Yes, very interesting. I'm going to, another question? Is there another one out there? How are we doing for time? When you say that the cordoning off would work, presumably it's also an issue for Charleston. I know that in Giverny, I once had the good fortune to meet the grandson of Monet's cousin, I believe, and who remembered the garden.
A close connection.
Yes, but he remembered the garden from Monet's day. I met him when he was an old man, and he told me that one of the things about it was that actually it was much neater and more gardened
Well
than
done,
it had been.
yeah.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that's a problem. He sort of liked it looser.
My father-in-law liked it tidy, interestingly.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He wanted the roses to be dead-headed every other day, you know, understandably in a way, but it's interesting that he definitely was from a slightly different generation and slightly different. He wanted the farm to be very tidy and, you know, sort of pigs and what goes with pigs and everything. It was not quite what he felt should be its public face, you know.
Yes.
And a public face should be a very neat and tidy. Sunday best is what I always think. Sissinghurst should not have its Sunday best on, is my view. But gardeners and Nigel wanted it to have its Sunday best on.
It's interesting because I think one of the joys of both of these books is that what we end up feeling is that gardens, kitchens, meals, picnics and so on are actually slightly better if they're not necessarily in their Sunday best. In fact, I'm inclined to just end by showing you one picture from Emma's book, which is she writes very movingly about the appeal of bacon. And there's this wonderful photograph of perfect bacon, which is not in any kind of special designed nouvelle cuisine kind of dish. But, oh my God, it makes you want to eat the bacon. And if you're not vegetarian, assuming nobody's vegetarian. And I think that philosophy that both of you have managed to imbue of something that we can that's beautifully made and of very high quality and skilled and thoughtful and carefully designed and so on, but at the same time has the appeal of a platter of perfectly cooked bacon, is exactly the right ethos. And I hope it's something that Charleston has too, something not too perfect. I think on that note, we may wind up, unless there's a bursting last question. No, I just want to say thank you so much. You've both been absolutely wonderful. How lovely to hear that.
Thanks very much to all three of you for sort of illuminating us and inspiring us and filling us with the thrill of domesticity, business, and so much more besides. I have one more question, and that's for Emma. Could you please plug your teapot?
Yes.
Which you promised me you would do.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
Okay.
It's very important you all buy more raffle tickets. It's for the appeal, isn't
It's
it?
for the Charleston Centenary Project Appeal.
Because one of the prizes is a zinnias teapot that we've donated, but there are lots of other nice things. So more raffle tickets, everybody.
Yep. Thank you very much. And thank you too, very, very much, to Kevin and Prudence Watts and Sussex Country Gardener for sponsoring this afternoon's event. I think we've enjoyed it hugely. Could I ask the audience to remain in their seats just for a couple of moments while I take Emma and Sarah out to the book tent, where I'm sure they'll be delighted to sign copies of their books to you. Thank you.